Okay, let's try this again. Hopefully I won't have the volume problems I've been having this morning. I made a video and I ended up having to delete it, or at least I deleted most of it. I saved the first part of it because there's some really cute, there's a really cute moment there with Rocky and I cuddling here, so I saved that. But the rest of it I deleted because you can't hear most of it. Hopefully this one will turn out better. So this is basically a continuation or a remake of my comments on the fact that we're living in a Luciferian system. And if you see the first video, pardon me. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. We're having technical difficulties, we are. I'm using my tablet and there's always issues with the volume with the tablet. Hopefully that'll help my throat some. Okay, here we go. Let's get this show on the road. Basically, what I was saying is that we're living under a Luciferian system, and that's why a lot of the things that are happening in the world and have been happening in the world happen. That's the reason that we don't get justice, really, in courts. That's the reason we have corrupt officials. It's the reason we have corrupt police officers and corrupt lawyers and corrupt judges and all that. It's the reason we have corrupt politicians. It's the reason that big corporations are run on a corrupt basis. Basically, it's like this. This is Lucifer's system. For the time being, it is. Since the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, this has been Lucifer's system we've been living under. And it's going to continue to be Lucifer's system until Jesus comes back. And when Jesus comes back, then it will become a principled and godly system instead of a corrupt system like what we have now. So I'm going to touch on a few things to make my point. People get mad at me when I call this a Luciferian system, and when I say that the people who run it are not good people, because part of the brainwashing that we get when we're growing up and throughout life is that only the best people rise to the top. Now, there are some good people in high positions. It's not like everybody in a high position is bad, but the majority are, because it is a Luciferian system. And the ones who are good have an uphill battle, I'll tell you. They have to really, I respect the ones who are good because they've got a lot of things going against them in this system. So good on them for maintaining their integrity. You know, that's not easy to do. In that world, it's not easy to do, so good on them for it, you know. But yeah, it's pretty much a corrupt system. I told a story there in the first video about a car that my dad owned in the 1970s. It was a 1969 Ford LTD Brougham. Beautiful car. Had a 429 engine in it. My dad was really proud of that engine, I'll tell you. Powerful, big V8 engine, you know. My dad liked fast cars. He liked powerful cars. And this thing was a land yacht. It was a big old four-door sedan. It was green. I think they were all green, you know, but it was a green four-door sedan. It was a really nice car. It had no anti-sway bars in it, so it leaned like a son of a you-know-what on the curves. And if you were ever to have a blowout on a curve at high speed, you'd leave the road. I mean, that would be it, because it was just the big tires on the thing that kept it on the road, really. So, I mean, I say, but it was a beautiful car. You just float down the road in it. And just a really nice, a sharp-looking car, a really nice car to ride in and stuff. But those cars had an issue with the transmission. They had an automatic transmission in them, and it used to kick itself into gear when the car would be idling. This is something that they did. And there were people killed by those cars. There were people maimed by them and stuff because a car like that would sometimes just shoot across the parking lot and hit somebody. Be sitting there idling, and it would hit somebody because it would kick itself into gear and away it'd go. And there were lawsuits. Ford did everything to cover it up because the bean counters figured out that it would cost more to bring all those cars in and fix them. So they didn't do that anymore than it would just to deal with the lawsuits. And so, they'd settle out of court and all that, and they put people through hell first, though, and then they'd settle after they put you through a few years of crap in the courts. And there, of course, there'd be a gag order. You'd have to agree not to say anything about the case. But that went on all through the 70s, and then in the early 80s, the documents came out. Now, I had told my dad that the car was doing that because I'd be sitting in it sometimes waiting for him to come out of some place, and the car would just roll ahead a bit and stop, and then it would roll ahead a little bit and stop again. Whenever the engine went into the low idle, it'd kick itself into gear, and it would roll ahead a little bit and stop. And then when it kicked into the high gear, that's when it would stop. And then when it kicked into the high idle, it would stop. And then when it kicked into the low idle, it would engage again and roll ahead a little bit and stop. It would stop again when it kicked into the high idle. Because an engine, when it's idling, it goes through a high and low idle. It goes through a high and a low idle kind of a setting, a kind of a cycle, And you'll hear the engine will idle high, and then it'll idle low, and then it'll idle high again. And anyway, when it would go on the low idle, this is what it would do. I used to slide behind the wheel and put my foot on the brake to stop it from doing it, to make sure the car couldn't roll ahead like that. But anyway, my dad actually taught me how to drive on that car when I was 8 years old, and I tell that story in an old video anyway. But you can find it on here somewhere in the channel. You have to scroll down quite a bit, I would imagine, but it is there. Anyway, bottom line is Ford covered that problem up. The car my dad had at least never seriously hurt or killed anybody. It was something it would do. Now, my dad came to me and apologized to me in the early 80s for giving me such a hard time, for saying the car was doing that. And he told me, he said, I was wrong and you were right. It was doing that. He said, it's all come out. Ford Motor Company covered it up. But yeah, those cars did do that, and you were right. And, I'm sorry for having given you such a hard time like I did, because you were telling the truth and I didn't believe you. And he apologized to me, my dad did, for that. But the bottom line is this. That's how little Ford Motor Company cares about people. That's how little they all do. It's not just Ford. I don't want to pick on Ford here. It isn't just Ford. It's all the other automotive manufacturers. They've all had similar situations where they've covered up things that they knew were hurting or killing people because it was cheaper to deal with the lawsuits than to repair the vehicles. The bean counters, they decided it's better to kill some people than to fix the vehicles because it's cheaper. That's how little these big corporations care about you. Drug companies do the same thing. They'll have a product out there that they know is killing people, and they'll just sell it. And if they get the odd lawsuit, well, they'll deal with that when it comes. But there's so much money to be made that they won't withdraw the product that they know is hurting and killing people. That's how little they care about you. Now, obviously, if we were under a godly system, a principled, fair, and godly system, this would never happen. A human being's life would be worth more. Even if only one person was going to be killed because of this defective product, whatever it is, as soon as the company became aware that they had a product that was going to kill somebody, they'd recall the whole works and they'd fix them. Or they'd give the people back their money, failing that. But they wouldn't have stuff out there that they knew was hurting and killing people, even one person. God values even one person. The Bible says that God even values a sparrow. Jesus said that one time. He said, God looks after a sparrow. How much more are you worth than a sparrow? So he said, don't worry, God will look after you. God even looks after a sparrow. He'll look after you. So, every individual is just of immeasurable value to God. But of course, the adversary, Lucifer, it's the opposite with him. None of us are worth anything as far as he's concerned, and he wants us all gone. He wants to take us all down with him. And see, Jesus is going to be his undoing, and he knows that. And see, it's through the sacrifice of Jesus, it's through the blood of Jesus that this system will come to an end eventually. When Jesus returns, it's going to come to an end. And then we are going to go into a godly and principled system. But in the meantime, we got to deal with this. We got to deal with what we got to deal with and do our best, that's all, to deal with that. But the thing is, that's the reason that the devil that Lucifer tried to destroy, to invalidate, that's the word I'm looking for, to invalidate the sacrifice. That's why Lucifer tempted Jesus in the desert. He wanted Jesus to sin, because if Jesus sinned, that would invalidate the sacrifice. And Lucifer knew that if Jesus successfully made the sacrifice, that his days would be numbered from then on. And so he wants to continue running this system. Running this system is a far better job than burning in a pit of fire for eternity. If I was him, I'd want to run it too, rather than to do that. But like I say, I understand the devil. It's not like I don't get it. I don't support him, but I understand him. The things he does do make sense. If you just for a minute look at it from how he would look at it. But the fact that he's running things explains why things are the way they are. It explains why we have governments that are willing to throw us under the bus, and corporations that are willing to kill us and make us sick and everything else, all for profit and power, all to have power and profit. When the devil tempted Jesus, he said, just jump off the mountain. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not quoting the scripture exactly as it's written. But that's what he said, basically, was just jump off the mountain. Scripture says, it says that the angels will bear you up, lest you strike your foot upon a stone. And Jesus responded, the scriptures also say, do not tempt the Lord your God. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said, and he was correct. But they were both correct. The scriptures do say both things. Of course, Lucifer was he was only taking that one thing into account because he wanted to trick Jesus into sinning. But Jesus is smarter than Lucifer, so that didn't work. Then he said, you must be hungry. Haven't eaten in a long time. He's on a 40-day fast, I said, see those stones over there? Turn them into bread. Have yourself a feast. And again, Jesus answered him with scripture, didn't give in to temptation. And finally, Lucifer showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. He said, all this can be yours. I'll give it all to you. But, get down in front of me and worship me. And then you can have this. And Jesus basically said, not interested, go away. I've had enough of you, go away. You're annoying me. Now, again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it boiled down to. Jesus did not say, those aren't yours to give. He didn't do that. He didn't challenge the devil's ownership of those systems, of those kingdoms. He just said he didn't want them. That's all. Not interested. No deal. Go away. That's what it was. It wasn't, you don't own those. You can't, like if somebody come to you and they wanted to sell you something and you knew that thing didn't belong to them, you'd say, well, you have no right to sell that. That's not yours. Well, Jesus would have told the devil that too if he had offered something for sale that didn't belong to him. But he didn't do that. He never challenged the devil's claim of ownership over those things, over those kingdoms, those systems. He just said he didn't want them. That's all. I don't want it. Go away. That's what it was. So through omission, Jesus even acknowledged that the devil owns those systems. Anyway, I hope my voice is coming through better on this than it was before, but here's the thing. The fact of even that they target, like in the United States, when they assassinate a president, it always seems to be the good ones they get. Abraham Lincoln, John Kennedy, I mean, these are guys who did good. These were good presidents who actually had the will of the people in their hearts and in the best interest of the people in their hearts. So they had to be eliminated. John Kennedy did the equivalent of what Trump talks about doing, which is draining the swamp. John Kennedy was trying to do the same thing. He didn't refer to it as draining the swamp. He didn't use that verbiage, but he was trying to do the same thing. He vowed to eliminate all these government agencies that were overstepping their authority and causing trouble for people for no good reason. He said that's going away. He vowed to eliminate the mafia's role in government when he was aware of it because his own father was connected with the mafia. And he knew how much of a role the mafia was playing in government, and he vowed to put a stop to it. He said there'd be no more of that. His brother Bobby, who was the Attorney General, actively went after the mafia. And he promised to do that. That was part of his campaign when he was up for election, was, I'm going to go after these mafia people. And in fact, they shot him too. They shot John Kennedy in 1963, and then they shot Bobby Kennedy in 1968, when he was on the fast track to become the next president. They put a bullet in him. That was not going to happen. You see, what they both had in common is they wanted to drain the swamp, just like Trump says he wants to drain the swamp, and now he's been grazed by a bullet that would have killed him had he not turned his head just by chance at the last minute. They always seem to get their good ones. Reagan. They shot Reagan. He didn't die, but they shot him. He was big on limiting government power, on smaller government, on more self-reliance and smaller government. They got rid of him. Or they tried to. They didn't get rid of him, but they tried to. I misspoke there. They didn't get rid of him. But they did make an attempt. I believe that what Lee Harvey Oswald said when he was caught after the Kennedy assassination was correct. He said, I'm a patsy. I think he was a patsy. I think he was set up. I think the young man that took a shot at Trump was set up. I think that there's no way he got into a position where he could do that with the security around there and stuff unless he was allowed to get into that position. Now, like I say, it is possible that people were just asleep at the switch and there was incompetence. That does happen. But I don't believe that was the case. I really do believe that there's more to it, and there's now evidence coming out that strongly points in the direction that there was more to it than just some young disgruntled nut going to take the law into his own hands and get rid of this guy, or whatever. There's far more to it than that. Now, I mean, the thing about these men like John Kennedy, men like Donald Trump, is they do get things done. Now, they're not perfect. They have weaknesses. John Kennedy and Donald Trump John Kennedy was an awful womanizer, and so was Donald Trump. That's a weakness of character. But the thing is, men of that caliber tend to have very strong appetites. And the appetite for sex is a strong appetite. And, sex drive is strong in everybody pretty much. And really, why would we bother with all the drama that comes with it a lot of the time if it wasn't such a strong thing? And men like John Kennedy and men like Donald Trump tend to have very strong appetites. And people don't like to hear this because they think it's vulgar, and I suppose it is a little bit. But, a man likes a good steak. We have an appetite, us men do. We like certain things. We like a good steak, and we like a good piece of tail. That's just how it is, and even more so with high-powered men like that. So yeah, it's a weakness of character, really. And a lot of the time it becomes their Achilles heel, these high-powered men, this strong sex drive that they tend to have. But these are men who get things done. And that makes them a threat. If their intentions are bad, then that works in favor of the corrupt system. But if their intentions are good, they become a serious threat because these are guys who get things done. And if they say, I'm going to drain the swamp, they're damn well going to drain the swamp. If they say, I'm going to destroy the mafia, I'm going to limit the power of the military-industrial complex, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, that makes the people who are in those situations, who are part of that corruption, really nervous. They're like, oh boy, we got to get rid of this guy, he's a threat. He's going to screw us up badly. And so then the bullets start flying. Right now even, they're always trying to get us into wars. They're trying to do that now again. Who makes money in a war? It's not you and I that make money in a war. It's people like us that have to go and fight in a war, or we have to sacrifice our children or our grandchildren to a war. The high-powered people at the top make a killing, literally and figuratively, off war. Who provides all the tanks and other vehicles? Who provides the guns and the ammunition? Who provides all the kit that a soldier carries? The backpacks and the mess kits and the canteens and all the rest of it. The boots and the belts and the hats. Who provides all that? The prepared meals. There's big money in those MREs, those prepared meals and those box meals. There's big money in those things. A lot more of those get consumed in a war than in peacetime. And the same's true with tanks and bullets, and a lot more bullets get fired in a war than they do in peacetime. A lot more tanks are needed, and a lot more tanks get wrecked and have to be replaced in a war than in peacetime. And so on. And so there's a lot of money to be made in a war for certain people. And that's why you get these politicians who are Luciferian by nature pushing for war. And also because that kind of a death, all these deaths, these are like sacrifices to their master. These are sacrifices to Lucifer, basically. So yeah, they push for war all the time because whether it's necessary or not. Now I know we're living in a corrupt, fallen world, and sometimes you got to fight. Sometimes you got to ball up your fist and hit somebody with it. That's just how it is. But no sane and sensible person is looking forward to doing that, and no sane and sensible person is pushing things in that direction. Especially if there's nothing to be gained by doing it. But here's the key, there is something to be gained by doing it. For them. Not for us. All we get is we get to be traumatized and maimed and killed. That's what we get. Plus, the other thing is, during a war, they can take away your civil rights. More power for them when there's a war on. And they like power. So again, they're pushing for a war. Going to make lots of money and screw us over and screw us up and kill us and take away our rights. Well, nobody who loves you is going to do that. Only people who hate you want that for you. Only people who hate you want you to lose your son or your grandson to a war so that they can make more money, so they can have more power over you. So they can tell you when you got to go to bed or how far you're allowed to travel from your home or what you're allowed to say. Yeah, it's a Luciferian system. The good news is, though, Jesus is going to come back. He told us he's going to come back. His sacrifice is valid because he didn't sin. He didn't give in when Lucifer tempted him. And, Lucifer now, he's running scared because he knows his time is almost up. He's had a pretty good run, but it's coming to an end, and he knows it. And, again, it's understandable. He should be scared. I'd be scared. If I was him, I'd be terrified. He has every reason to be scared. It's a perfectly reasonable thing that he's scared. But the thing is, what he's doing is he's on a mad rush now to do as much damage as he can. It's like, I'm going to be taken out, but I'm going to take as many out as I can in the process. This is why we're seeing a lot of the stuff we're seeing now that makes no sense to any logical person. Any logical thinking person has to look at what's happening in the world today, a lot of the stuff that's happening, and shake their head and say, what kind of a loony bin is this? But see, it's because Lucifer is in a mad rush to get as much done as he can before he's finished. Jesus is on his way, and when that happens, Lucifer's done. This Luciferian system comes to an end, and Jesus takes over. Jesus takes the wheel. Right now, we got the vehicle is careening out of control, but Jesus is going to come in and take the wheel and straighten everything out. And they say Jesus take the wheel. Well, he's going to. Anyway, that's happening soon. He promised us he'd do that, and Jesus don't lie. So he is going to do that. And as far as Lucifer goes, like I say, this is his system, and that's why all this is happening. And I do believe that God uses people. We're all flawed. There's not one of us that isn't flawed. Donald Trump is definitely flawed. Donald Trump, in some respects, is a real jerk. He's a bit of a bully, really, in some respects. And I'm not a big fan of bullies. But I do believe he's being used by God in this situation. I really do. And if he gets back in, and I think he will at this point, I think all the stuff that's been done, including this latest thing, this assassination attempt, has backfired on his enemies. And again, I think God will do that. God will turn evil around and use it for good. if he chooses to, and I believe he has. And the thing is, I believe Trump will get back in, and I believe if that happens, he will keep us out of a world war, at least for now. We're going to have a third war. We know a third world war. We know that because the scriptures tell us so. But I believe that Trump will delay that, at least for a while. And I'm not a huge fan of politicians. And like I say, I fully acknowledge that Trump is a flawed man. We're all flawed men. I'm a flawed man too. So that's not a judgment. It's just an acknowledgement of fact. The man is flawed in certain ways, just like we all are. But, we can be used by God too. And I believe that's what's happening right now. I believe that man is being used by God to stave off World War III, basically, and to stave off a bunch of other evil things that are happening. But yeah, ultimately, the most that's going to happen is it's going to be slowed down. But, God will do that because he doesn't want anyone to perish. He wants us all to have every opportunity not to perish, to come to him and to forsake Lucifer. And so every day that he buys us is another day when we have an opportunity to do that. And when the final day comes and judgment comes, none of us can say that we didn't have every opportunity. Because if we do, God will tell us, well, hey, look, I did this, that, and the other thing. Could have all been over a long time ago, but I fixed it so it wasn't. Because I wanted you to come to me. And you repeatedly chose not to. Every day I gave you, you squandered. So here we are. And that'll be it. There are no more days. It's done. So yeah, I do believe he's using Trump, and I think he uses other people too, to buy us a little time. That's all. Give us every opportunity to come to him. And look at the people he's used in the Bible. Some of the ragtag bunch that he's used. Look at the people he's used. Tax collectors, fishermen, all sorts. Rough characters, a lot of them. And a lot of them very sinful. A lot of them not very nice men. Look, he used Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus. Paul was a really bad man. Paul himself said, I am chief sinner. Of the sinners, I am chief. Well, chief is boss. Chief is number one sinner. The chief sinner is the number one sinner. And Paul claimed that for himself. He said, that's me. I'm number one sinner. But look at all the great things that Paul did. Look how Paul served the Lord for a good portion of his life. Now, he had to be knocked off a horse and blinded to do it. But he got the message, and once he got the message, you couldn't have asked for a better servant. God couldn't have asked for a better servant than Paul once Paul got the message. That's why Paul changed his name, because on that day, Saul of Tarsus passed away, and Paul was born. You see, now God put up with Saul of Tarsus for a long time. Saul of Tarsus grieved God. For a long time, Saul of Tarsus grieved God with the things he was doing. And he did awful things. He killed Christians. He was a nasty piece of work. He devoted his life to persecuting and killing people. Imagine doing something like that. That's not a nice guy. But you know what? Once God got through to him, and like I say, God had to knock him off his horse and blind him to do it. But once God got through to him, he became one of God's greatest servants. But God gave that man a lot of days to turn things around before he did that to him. And then once he did that, he was able to use Saul, who became Paul, for his purposes, and he ended up being just as great, if not a greater, servant of God than he ever was as an adversary of God. You know, see, that's what God does. He turns bad around for good. He takes the hopeless and he redeems it. If you've got some old soiled cloak that you wouldn't put on your body because it's dirty and it's soiled and it'll make your skin crawl to wear it, and you're going to throw it in the trash, if God decides to, he can clean that thing and it'll be nice. It'll be the nicest garment in the whole world, where a king would want to wear that. You know, you showed that to a king would say, give that here, I'm going to put that on. You know, God can do that. God does that with us every day, or he tries to. But we have free will, so we have to be open to it. Even with Saul getting knocked off his horse and blinded, he still had to make a choice. And thankfully, he chose properly. God still wouldn't have compelled him to serve him, you know. Anyway, that's the bottom line. We're under a Luciferian system. That's why a lot of this stuff is happening. That's happening now. And especially now because the pace of corruption is speeding up because we're getting closer to the return of Jesus. So it's not all bad. It's kind of good in a way. But what a shit show. What an awful shit show. Yeah, and we're living through it. But again, God wouldn't have allowed us to be here at this time to live through it if we weren't strong enough for it. You know, God knows we can take it, and that's why we're here. All right, we'll talk later.